Well, thank everyone here. Let me start the program. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jimbo. I'm Counselor of the Japanese Embassy. It's great to be here with you today. Thanks so much for coming to join us. We are here today to discuss about the safety of navigation from the viewpoints of the two major maritime countries, Japan and Greece. I'm personally sorry to hear from Tsakonas. Now, firstly, I'd like to begin the seminar with the opening remarks by the Representative Ambassador Nakayama Yasunori, Ambassador Boura, who gives to the Ambassador Boura, and distinguished speakers and panelists, ladies and gentlemen, and online viewers, good morning. And thank you very much for joining us today in this hybrid seminar organized by the Embassy in Greece and ELIAMEP, titled The Safety of Navigation from the Eastern Mediterranean Sea to the Indo-Pacific. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to all the speakers and the panelists for their participation. I also like to thank ELIAMEP for its cooperation in organizing this seminar. Today's discussion will be focused on the issue of safety of navigation in the areas from Eastern Mediterranean to the Indo-Pacific. In those vast areas, ladies and gentlemen, we have been witnessing all sorts of illegal activities, such as piracy, human trafficking, promotion of illegal migration, and illegal resource exploitation. Those activities pose security threats to the region and the international peace and stability. The countries concerned have already been taking various measures against them, taking into consideration the strategic importance of each of those seats, both in geopolitical and geoeconomic senses. Today, however, we have even more compelling reason to revisit those issues anew. Of course, that is emergence of the greatest challenge to the existing international order, namely Russia's unique aggression against Ukraine. With shock and anger, political leaders and policymakers, both in Europe and Japan, have come to be united in confronting Russia and supporting Ukraine. And moreover, they have come to realize that the security of Europe and that of Indo-Pacific is indivisible, and that the seas between the two regions are all interconnected. And this realization has led Prime Minister Kishida of Japan and Prime Minister Mitsotakis of Greece to issue the joint statement in January this year, in which they agreed on their strong opposition against any kind of unilateral attempts to change status quo by force or the threat anywhere in the world, including South and East Mediterranean, South and East China Sea, and East Mediterranean. Therefore, it is extremely timely and meaningful to consider how Japan and Greece, as a newly declared strategic partners, can jointly contribute to the maintaining the safety of navigation from the East Mediterranean to the Indo-Pacific. In this seminar, prominent experts and policymakers, both from Japan and Greece, will analyze the latest situation in those seas and explore possible cooperation among the countries concerned towards maintaining the safety of navigation and realizing free and open international order. I sincerely hope that discussions at this seminar would illuminate a future course of action for our common cause. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Nakayama. Now I'd like to invite Ambassador Boura. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Your Excellency, Ambassador Yasunori Nakayama, for your introduction. On behalf of ELIAMEP, I would like to welcome you all to this seminar co-organized by the Embassy of Japan and ELIAMEP. With over 80% of global trade and 2/3 of the world's energy supply transported by sea, the prosperity and security of our world depends to a great extent on the safe and secure navigation. Developments across the globe, such as Russia's military aggression against Ukraine, tensions in various maritime areas, such as the Horn of Africa, the Gulf, the Indo-Pacific, remind us that we need to step up multilateral and regional, as well as bilateral cooperation with the aim of finding sustainable solutions to the maritime security issues. At the same time, the spread of advanced technology, including disruptive potential technologies, global economic and energy pressures, great power competition, and the efforts of regional players to maximize their power, and as the Ambassador, as His Excellency mentioned, terrorism and criminal activities call for increased engagement with efforts to minimize the risks. NATO and the European Union have set new levels of ambition and established new patterns of cooperation to tackle emerging challenges and to contribute to security. Japan and Greece are among the world's largest shipping nations. Safety of navigation is vital for their interests. ELIAMEP is therefore happy to cooperate with the Embassy of Japan and to invite experts, scholars, and officials from both countries who will share their analysis on the issue of the safety of navigation from the East Mediterranean to the Indo-Pacific and discuss recommendations for further cooperation to address the challenges of maritime security. This conference is taking place in the spirit of the excellent relations between the two countries. The recent visit of the Prime Minister of Greece, Mr. Kyriakos Mitsotakis, to Japan, the first visit to Japan by a Greek Prime Minister in 17 years, upgraded, as His Excellency mentioned, the bilateral relationship to a strategic relationship and enhanced bilateral cooperation in priority sectors, including maritime security, maritime cooperation. So on behalf of ELIAMEP, I would also like to thank eventually our sponsors and partners and ISELOS for its kind support. And without further ado, I will introduce the first panel of the seminar, which will focus on the state of play from the East Mediterranean Sea to the Indo-Pacific and its contribution to the safety of navigation. Before the presentations begin, allow me to say a few words on the procedure. Keynote speakers will make presentations for about 20 minutes each. A panel discussion will follow until 11:40, when the first session of the forum of this seminar will end before coffee break. The first keynote speaker is Professor Ken Jimbo of Keio University. I invite Professor Ken Jimbo to take the floor online. Professor, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to begin by thanking ELIAMEP and also Japan Embassy in Greece for kindly inviting to this very important seminar, focusing upon the state of play in this safety of navigation that affects both Japan and Greece, and also focusing on the cross-boundary geographical focus, both in the Indo-Pacific and also at the Mediterranean Sea. So I'm very grateful to focus this very strategic agenda by experts of two countries. So let me share the slide. Okay, so the safety of navigation in Indo-Pacific region, first of all, is the critical importance, not only to the country in the region, but also to the global economy and security. And as you are all aware, the Indo-Pacific is home to some of world's busiest and most significantly important sea lanes, which facilitate the flow of goods, resources, and energy between Asia, Middle East, and also Europe. Consequently, the ensuring the security of safety of navigation in this region has a broader implication, including those of the Mediterranean Sea, and a couple of, I think, specific significance. First, on the economic domain, a significant portion of the global trade transits through the Indo-Pacific, including the critical choke points like a Strait of Malacca, the Suez Canal, and the Strait of Hormuz. So any disruption to this navigation in this region could have a significant impact on the global supply chains, affecting not only the economies of the countries involved, but also the global economic stability. And as it was witnessed as the aftermath of the Ukraine crisis since last February. So this includes the Mediterranean countries, which depends on the smooth flow of goods and energy through essential these sea lanes. And the second I would like to highlight is the strategic significance. The Indo-Pacific is the region of the strategic competition between major powers like the United States, China, India, Japan, and also that involves Australia. So ensuring the safety of navigation, again, is crucial for maintaining the stable balance of power and preventing conflict escalation. So the secure and stable Indo-Pacific region is vital for the overall security of the Mediterranean, as any conflict in the Indo-Pacific could have a ripple effect across the globe. So the importance is not limited to the country in the region, but extends to the Mediterranean Sea and beyond, given the interconnected nature of the global trade, security, and the environmental concern. And here I prepare the outlook of the military expenditure projections from 2005 to 2030. And as you can see, across the Indo-Pacific region, you may find that United States remains to be the pivotal superpower in this region, while you may also find that China is rapidly, try to reach the level of almost like a 60% of the military expenditure of the United States through 2030. And one of the things you may also would like to find is the growing gap of those figures between China and those of regional states. Back in 2005, the military expenditure of China and defense budget of Japan was almost equalized. That was only 18 years ago. But as of 2020, China spends almost like 6 times bigger than that of the Japanese budget. This is, by the way, based on the CIPRI standards. And if Japan remains to be 1% of the GDP in the expenditure of the military budget, China may be, I think, spending probably 9 to 10 times bigger than that of Japan. This is the scale of the changing distribution of the power that we are experiencing right now. So we always have to look at the moving target of the enormous expansion of the material capability and the influence at sea in the Indo-Pacific region. This is particularly important to know why we have decided to adopt the new national security strategy together with the national defense strategy, which enable us to commit to the doubling the size of the defense budget in next 5 years. So with that figure, we are going to increase the level, which may be at least having a 20 to 25% of the military budget vis-a-vis China. It still is the far, ahead in terms of the finding the gap between the two. But things that is most important is to secure our critical capability in order to deny the Chinese prospect of the success in changing the status quo in the region. So we are trying to acquire the capacity for the denial deterrence or deterrence by denial in order to, again, deny the prospect of the operation of the Chinese operational effectiveness over Taiwan, East China Sea, and also in the South China Sea. And I don't think you can see all sort of things. These are basically the structure of the Japan's national defense strategy in 2022. Here you can find where we are focusing upon the specific capability to be adopted by the Japanese self-defense force, which has a lots of focus on the air and the maritime domain, including those of the cross-domain awareness that involves the electromagnetic warfare, and also that involves the cyber and also the space. So what we are going to acquire in next 5 years is existing, those defense capability to be more operational in order to deal with the high-end escalatory scenario, especially over Taiwan, and also in the sea lanes of communication across the Indo-Pacific region. And then towards the 2032, in next 10 years, we are going to acquire the new capability that involves the extension of the standoff defense capabilities, and that is the long-range anti-ship missiles, long-range, surface-to-surface missiles, in order to broaden the strategic depth and the geography of how the self-defense force can manage to deal with in the Indo-Pacific region. So our scope of the geography has been much broadened through the adoption of this strategy. And our naval activity obviously has to focus with our near neighbors like China and North Korea, but also has the capacity to broaden the cooperation with regional allies and partners. And that is, I think, the most essentially important part of the Japanese national defense strategy in the year to come. Now back to the safety of navigation and why does it matter? As I mentioned, that it does matter because of the global economy is at stake through the safety of navigation in the Indo-Pacific, and then we have to adapt our capability to further, severe security environment across the Indo-Pacific region. In terms of the maritime security, I think we have to highlight three major dimensions. One is the rising attention has been paid on the gray zone coercion. As you can see that you cannot really find a black and white situation in the many cases in the maritime domain because there are intrusion by the non-military nature of the activities by the vessels, not only limited to the military domain, but also the non-military capacities, and also the I think lots of like civilian vessels and the maritime activities that can really change the status quo by force. So I think those kind of infringement of the territorial water and airspace could be done without crossing the military threshold. And these are something that that we continue to highlight in our strategy. With that, we really need to develop and field to operate and the law enforcement capacity through the activities of the Coast Guards, and then to put those kind of issues on the table of the legal kind of status. And these are, I think, a very important nature to be passing along with the following sequence of the capacity to be done by the self-defense force and also in the military domain. So the second and thirds are mostly done through the military domains that involves the low-intensity conflicts, and also in the higher end that involves the anti-access and the area denial challenges, especially at the sea. So those kind of different layers of the intensity of the conflict has to be seamlessly, I think, adopted through the interagency collaboration, starting from the law enforcement capabilities and also through the Coast Guards, and then all up to the military domains by ourselves, and also through the U.S. engagement and the allies and partnership cooperation. And those are, I think, the structure of how we are trying to deal with the safety of navigation in the Indo-Pacific region. Specifically speaking, in Northeast Asia, we care about the East China Sea, especially in dealing with our surrounding waters, that the specific focus has been paid on the Senkaku Islands. They are utilized by the Chinese names, but it has been contested, and the contestation has been demonstrated through the increasing amount of the operational tempo has been done through the Coast Guard vessels and the Maritime patrol by the two forces. So I think that how we can really maintain our robust nature to secure our operational kind of capabilities in the vicinity of the Senkaku Islands remain to be a very important aspect in maintaining the stability in the East China Sea. And in terms of the Southeast Asia, the South China Sea has been at stake for almost like 2 decades. And through the 2 decades, what has been the game changer in this effect is the ongoing process of the reclamation of the artificial islands. And there has been more than 7, main bases and the facilities has been created by China, and that will become the major, I think, the platform for the future maritime, naval, and the Air Force operations in the South China Sea. And those kind of platform can be utilized for the forward deployment type of the forces for the future military operation by China. So this has been the major, I think, concern, especially when the crisis happens and escalatory situation may happen, how much that the China can make a difference by forward deploying their forces through those kind of maritime platforms will be the major concerns for the maintaining the maritime safety in our region. So these are the baseline of what we have in the Indo-Pacific region. And as I mentioned, that the basic structure of the maintaining of the stability in the region has been pursued in the multi-layered platform. But once again, I would like to emphasize that this is the very moving target issues, because the Chinese capabilities and keep on rising, and so as ours. But I think that China has been on the major players in those kind of dynamic change of the distribution of power. And then we definitely need to adapt to how to maintain the favorable balance of power in the Indo-Pacific region that involves the higher level of the cooperation among those like-minded states. First, to engage United States to be on board, and then to through the newly developed maritime cooperation, including those Quad members, Japan, Australia, India, collaborating with the United States to secure those maritime safety in the region. We also have a new collaboration including AUKUS, and that is the United States, Australia, UK naval cooperation, especially that the core item is to provide the nuclear propellant submarines to Australia, that would we expect that Australia will play the larger role, especially in the underwater and the anti-submarine warfare, that will be benefiting to collaborating with Japan, United States, and even India in the wider Indian Ocean. And that is I think, a newly developing nature of what's been happening. So thank you very much for listening. I'll stop here, especially I have focused on the issue of the Indo-Pacific, and look forward to the cross-comparing perspective between the Indo-Pacific and the Mediterranean Sea. Thank you very much for paying attention.
Thank you, Professor Jimbo, for this very comprehensive presentation. I would now invite Ambassador Umio Otsuka, who is Ambassador of Japan to the Republic of Djibouti and retired Vice Admiral of the Japan Maritime Self-Defense, to take the floor online.
Thank you very much. Good morning. This is a voice from African continent, the East corner. I'm very happy and I'm very proud of being invited by this distinguished membership, and Ambassador Nakayama and Ambassador Boura and the Admiral, distinguished scholars, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with me today. And I have been Ambassador of Japan to Djibouti almost 2.5 years. And with that, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And with that experience, together with my 41-year naval officer's experience, I would like to talk about today's subject from 3 points. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. These are the subtitles I would like to talk about. The first, and I just would like to briefly mention about the free and open Indo-Pacific. This is a strategy or vision or concepts of the Japanese foreign policy. And secondly, I'll talk about this region. This region, what I mean is my region here now, from the Indian Ocean to the Red Sea. And third, with my capacity of Ambassador of Japan to Djibouti, I just would like to touch upon briefly about Djibouti. So the next slide, please. Yes, the first topic. Next slide, please. Free and open Indo-Pacific. This is talked quite a lot in the international arena recently, but I think I can say with pride that this vision, this naming started from Japan, especially at the timing of the TICAD conference, Tokyo International Conference for African Development in 2016 in Kenya. By the former Prime Minister Abe, who was very unfortunately assassinated last year. And this vision had incorporated the 2 continents and 2 oceans. That means how we have the experience of pushed or assisted the Asian countries for their economic development, and how to transfer that success to Africa was one of the key points of this concept. And in order to do that, we need to cross the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean. So this is a very much maritime in nature. And this naming of Indo-Pacific is now widely used. The Americans adopted, and many European countries adopted this concept. So I think this is now widely spread. And next slide, please. And the 3 pillars, or what I would say, items are are supposed to be the key elements to this concept. That is that is with the foundation of ensuring the rule-based international order, and the pillars are the promotion of the rules or rule of law and freedom of navigation, trade. These are the elements of the values. And the next, the economic prosperity should be pursued. And the third one is, of course, peace and stability should be the basis of everything. And so this graph shows how we would like to transfer from east to west to the African continent. So where I am now is the western edge of the Indo-Pacific, which, on the other hand, the entry point of to the African continent by the Japanese foreign policy. The next slide, please. So this is a very busy slide, but just explained from the socio-economic development perspective, what are the key policies, I'm sorry, the measures of implementing policies, mostly along the sea lines of communication from Japan to Europe, and how we develop the basis of to facilitate our concept of a free and open Indo-Pacific. And the next slide, please. So this slide shows mainly from the security, maritime security perspective, and each items dictates what are the concrete measures to support the development of each countries along the coast of the Indo-Pacific. So key concept is how we develop or how we support the capacity building of each nation for them to be able to stand up by themselves for the security and or even to the counter some disaster relief or humanitarian problems. And the next slide, please. And this shows specifically for the military relations, particularly conducted by the coalition fashion, in the coalition fashion. And of course, a major actor here is the Navy, and the like-minded navies after the end of the Cold War, in particular, started operate together because the nature of the threat has shifted from a nation state actor to non-nation state actor, to include the piracy or some illegal trafficking of the drugs or humans or weapons, and other to include constabulary missions. So the next slide, please. Now move to my region, and the next, please. Just talk the one next, please. I think it's page 10. Yes, thank you. From two aspects, it's non-state actors that threatens maritime traffic in the area, and the second one is even the state actors now have become affecting the maritime security in this region. The next one, please. So look, please take a look at this, the area. Well, people talked, especially in Japan, quite a lot about the Persian Gulf or Arabian Gulf, because that is the source of our energy, i.e. the oil, crude oil. But it is, today, would like to focus on the other side, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait that connects the Indian Ocean to the Red Sea, and then via the Suez Canal to the Mediterranean Ocean. Because about 20,000 ships a year pass through this strait with a lot of commodities, to include the natural resources. And the strait, the shortest distance between the shore is about less than 20 miles. So it's very much strategic choke point, and Djibouti is dominating this strait. So it is a very important geostrategic point of the maritime security. Next slide, please. So the first question is about the nation. After the Cold War ended, people thought we could have some dividend of the peace, but the reality was not like that. And the transnational threat came up as the threat to the freedom of navigation. And a good example was in 2001, after 9/11, against this transnational problem of terrorism, the Navy stood up and formed the Coalition Maritime Forces headquartered in Bahrain, and did act quite actively in the areas of the Northern Arabian Sea. But after that, especially in the time frame of 2007-8, the piracy was shed light at the venue of the United Nations Security Council. And then the specific task force named the CTF 151 stood up in 2009, and they focused solely on the piracy issues. And I'll talk about that later. As a result, now the piracy is very much decreasing in this area. And Djibouti was in the name of a Djibouti Code of Conduct in 2009. This is a framework to repress the piracy and armed robbery. This was amended in 2018 to broaden its horizon to include all the constabulary missions. And European Union is now very active, and I think this is a misprinted, I'm sorry. It started Red Sea project in 2022 in Djibouti, gathering the regional countries for broadened aspects. So these are basically what the areas or the regions, or even the international community focused on in this area from the aspect of the transnational threat. And next slide, please. And this slide shows the red line of the chart indicates the number of piracy incidents. And it was highlighted in 2010, 2011, but drastically decreased in the next couple of years. And now it's almost zero. But it is apparently the result of the presence, or actually the actions by the navies or the militaries present in this area. And people often say that, oh, no more piracy, but it is not true. I would say piracy does not disappear, but it is just being invisible because it is oppressed. And unless the fundamental problem of governance in the coastal countries, Yemen or Somali in particular, which is not very easy to resolve, this piracy will come up again once the military presence is gone. So I do believe this is a reality. So next slide, please. And this shows that from the view of Japan, this is a faraway place, but because our sea lines of communication that has supported the prosperity of Japan has been threatened in Asia as well. In the Malacca Strait, there is still piracy, but I'm talking about the Gulf of Aden area today. So what I mean is then the Japanese government decided at the time of 2008 to be a constructive and proactive contributor for the counter-piracy operation. Next slide, please. So then, since then, started 2008, 2009 timeframe, the Japanese government has deployed initially constantly the 2 destroyers and 2 fixed-wing maritime patrol aircraft based in Djibouti. But now we almost permanently deploy 1 destroyers and still two aircraft to Djibouti. And so this is quite a heavy burden for Japan, even though we have more than 50 destroyers. But because of the skyrocketing high operational tempo in the vicinity of Japan, we have a big threat. I don't name today, but it's quite easy to understand through the Professor Jimbo's presentation. We have a big problem in our vicinity, so we need more assets. But still, we try to contribute continuously in this area because this is not only the stake of Japan, but once the piracy is resumes and the traffic of the maritime traffic is cut off, that will cause a huge problem to the global economy. And so this is what we have done so far, and I believe we will do continuously. And the next slide, please. And but after the Arab Springs, there are a lot of skirmishes and turmoils and problems started in the Northern Africa, Middle East area. And Yemen is a good example of the troublesome country. And I don't talk much about this, but the Yemen has become a place of the war, not between the 2 sectors, but it's a war between Iran versus Saudi plus UAE, that kind of the event. Luckily enough, very recently, the 2 countries agreed for the reconciliation, and I'm very much looking forward to watching continuously how the situation in Yemen is becoming hopefully better. But the point I would like to talk here is Iran has become a major source of issues. I don't talk it's good or bad today. And many countries started taking measures. And there are lots of different frameworks I put here on the slide. And those are, yes, these are the countermeasures for the threat to the maritime traffic. But the sources of problem came from the Houthi factions of the northern side of Yemen, who are supposed to be pretty much by Iran. So now the country has become, instead of non-state actors, an issue in the area. So not only Iran, the major regional actors have become players or influencers in the area, Egypt or Turkey or Saudi Arabia, to name a few. And I would like to talk about Turkey because it is considered a constructive player in the region. and because they're supporting the fight against the terrorism or the rebels in Somalia or Ethiopia. So Ethiopia, Somalia are the two major venue of some troubles in the region. So they're considered an active and positive players. And talking about Turkey, I am a bit, as a Navy officer, the Japan and Turkey's Navy-to-Navy relationship is very good, and it has supported by a historical event in 1890 when the Ertuğrul frigate was sunk and more than 500 sailors were killed, and the Japanese Navy transported the coffins and also the survivors back to Istanbul. And in return, a long time later, 1985, when during the Iran-Iraq war, when the 200 Japanese left in Tehran, they were evacuated, not by the Japanese airlines, but the Turkish airline. And in return, in 1999, when a big earthquake happened in Turkey, the Japanese Navy ship transported lots of the housing back to Turkey. So that's a short story of the Navy. The next slide, please. And as such, this is an area of the country-to-country problems, to name a few on the slide. So more and more, the national issues have become the influencer to the security of the sea lines in this area. The next slide, please. And also, the ports are the subject of competition in this area. I don't talk much about this, but major ports, there are only in the eastern side of Africa, about 400 or 500 million people live in the hinterland, in the inland. So how we use the port is a major factor of the international relationship. So the next slide, please. And next. So just a little bit about Djibouti. It's the time is running out, so just one slide is okay. The next one, please. So Djibouti is a very small country of 1 million people, but it dominates the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and it is the only entry point and exit for Ethiopia, second largest populated country in Africa. So, interesting enough, there are hundreds of thousands of people are passing to migrate from Africa to Arabian Peninsula. And that is one of the source of the problems. Next slide, please. And Djibouti is very good. The next one. It has very good ports. The Djibouti container port is ranked 19th in the world by World Bank last year. The next one, please. And the Djibouti has accommodated the bases, foreign bases of these many countries: United States, France, Japan, Italy, and China. So that has been helping the security of Djibouti, definitely. And the next one, the final slide. And so through Djibouti, many countries pass through and has some replenishment visiting Djibouti. So it's a very much naval flavor living in Djibouti. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Umio Otsuka, for this thought-provoking contribution. And now our last keynote speaker is Vice Admiral Alexandros Diakopoulos, Director General of International Cooperation at the Hellenic Ministry of Foreign Affairs and former National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister. He's a Senior Policy Advisor at ELIAMEP. Admiral Diakopoulos, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Honorable ambassadors, Ambassador. Thank you very much. Ambassador of Philippines. Dear colleagues, we have two admirals here, Admiral Paloubis, Admiral Tsogos. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank you for your invitation for a second year to participate in this seminar. The subject that we're going to analyze and discuss under the general term safety of navigation, beyond its contemporary character, which has been very well described by the two previous speakers,
has its roots back to history for our maritime nations. Greece and Japan are prime examples of seafaring nations whose history and economy are inexorably linked to the sea. Subsequently, this fact affects our respective economies and informs our strategic and geopolitical posture. After all, the Western Alliance has definitely a maritime strategic posture. By using the term Western, I have to say, I don't mean it in a geographically, but politically, referring to the wider West, that is the group of like-minded nations and countries that believe and practice democracy and the rule of law and support a rules-based international order defined by international law. More specifically, the safety of navigation is a matter of great strategic importance for Greece. In my view, Mediterranean as a whole, but I will stick to the subject matter, Eastern Mediterranean represents a vital area for Greece and provides the required strategic depth. Moreover, our country remains one of the most significant regional actors, contributing to the stability and security of the region. Furthermore, our active role in international organizations like NATO and the EU, as well as our participation in many bilateral and multilateral schemes, highlight our active involvement in the maritime security architecture in the region. In a similar vein, the sea routes connecting Eastern Mediterranean to Indo-Pacific are extremely important for the economy and subsequently for the security and stability of the region, as well as of Europe as a whole. Eastern Mediterranean is linked with the Indo-Pacific through the Suez Canal and provides the shortest maritime route between Asian and European markets. East Med, straddling the Maghreb and the Mashrek and the Africa, constitutes a node between Europe, Africa, and Asia, as it is the mandatory point of passage for trade routes linking Europe to the Indian Ocean and by extension to the Asian markets. In other words, East Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean constitutes the western flank of the so-called Indo-Pacific and the natural outlet of its sea lines of communication. Now, safety of navigation is intrinsically linked with the law of the sea and rules-based international order. However, the rules-based order is continuously challenged by states who try to impose their maximalist and unlawful claims by force or the threat of use of force. Unfortunately, both the Eastern Mediterranean and the Indo-Pacific region have thus become areas of intense geopolitical competitions. And if I have here to name names, there is a symmetry to my mind that if you look at depth, the two, between the concept or the strategy of blue homeland and the 9 or 10 dash line in South China Sea. And the symmetry is in the disregard of the law of the sea and the maximalist claim that underpins these concepts. To understand the importance of the safety of navigation, one has to consider that the sea remains the major means of transportation for the global trade. More than 80% of the global trade is seaborne, and about 2/3 of the world's oil and gas supply is either extracted at sea or transported by sea. And nobody can ignore the increasing reliance on undersea cables, either for energy transportation or vast data flows. Thus, the protection of the sea lines of communication is of paramount importance and one of the critical tasks that navies have assumed. The task of keeping the sea lines open and safe has also many aspects and faces multiple challenges from non-state actors. Threats from illicit activities such as piracy and armed robbery at sea, organized crime, including smuggling of migrants and human trafficking, trafficking of arms and narcotics, terrorism, cyber attacks, or even unexploded ordnance at sea, constitute serious challenges in many regions. Therefore, the freedom of navigation is threatened both by revisionist states and malicious non-state actors. Greece, as a leading global player in the maritime sector, is obviously very sensitive to issues concerning maritime security and freedom of navigation. In this vein, Greece has always been firm and consistent proponent of the need for full respect of the international law, including, of course, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, without exceptions. Therefore, we actively contribute to the safety of the navigation by participating in operations and initiatives aiming to ensure freedom of navigation. Namely, from the outset of the EU Operation Atalanta, Greece, with Hellenic Navy assets, participated in numerous missions at the Horn of Africa. Now, with the joint efforts of the international community, the results were remarkable, and within few years, piracy incidents practically vanished in the area. Greece also participates at the European-led maritime awareness in the Strait of Hormuz and Mazog. After the unfortunate incident of the 2 Hellenic flagged ships that were illegally confiscated by the Iranian authorities in the same area, our interest in the area has increased significantly, and our synergies with regional stakeholders have also been multiplied. Regarding the EU strategy, Greece actively supported the establishment of a coordinated maritime presence in northwestern Indian Ocean and is willing to cooperate with its partners in the region to further promote CRIMARIO, which stands for Critical Maritime Routes Indian Ocean, and ESIWA, which stands for Enhancing Security Cooperation in and with Asia programs, as part of the EU strategy for an open and rules-based regional maritime architecture. We have also launched several bilateral military cooperation programs, setting multi-domain objectives with countries of the Eastern Mediterranean, aiming to promote stability and security in the maritime environment. In that context, we also participate in military and security capacity building programs, aiming to support other countries to develop their maritime capabilities. In conclusion, the overall geopolitical environment is experiencing turbulences causing drastic changes. Strategic competition for power and resources is increasing. Threats are becoming increasingly complex and multi-layered, with some countries seeking to redefine the core tenets of the multilateral order, including through violations of national sovereignty and borders. For all the above reasons, I believe that we must adopt appropriate maritime strategy in order to effectively address all maritime challenges, secure our maritime environment, and maintain stability along key shipping routes. Building and investing in our shared vision and common goals via information sharing and enhanced cooperation is a necessity. We shall discuss in the second panel on how we could cooperate in order to address these challenges. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you, Admiral, for this very, very interesting presentation. And many thanks to all keynote speakers for the interesting and enlightening presentations that I expect will be followed by an equally interesting discussion between the panelists and later, after the second panel, with the audience. But I will not delay and will immediately introduce the panelists. The panelists are Mr. Panagiotis Tsakonas, professor at the University of Athens, Department of Political Science and Public Administration, and head of the Security and Foreign Policy Program at ELIAMEP. Mrs. Sofia Galani, who is Assistant Professor of International Law at Pantheon University, and Mr. Yannis Trifilis, member of the Executive Committee of the Hellenic Chamber of Shipping and member of the ELIAMEP Advisory Board. So thank you for your participation in this panel. We listened to three very interesting, very important, insightful presentations that touched upon issues of the contribution and concerns of Japan and Greece on the safety of navigation, the state of play in the seas from the East Mediterranean to the Indo-Pacific Ocean, and the importance and urgency, I would say, of ensuring safety of navigation. I will give you the floor for your brief comments, which should not exceed 10 minutes each to keep the time frame of the seminar. So, Professor Tsakonas, if I may ask, in the light also of the presentation of Admiral Diakopoulos, how can cooperation be achieved in the East Mediterranean so that the issue of safety of navigation, as well as the broader issue of the region's stability, be addressed? Is there any room for multilateral schemes to be promoted in the East
Thank you very much. It is well known that multilateralism is in retreat, as we say. So it is really hard to come up with good suggestions or effective suggestions on what should be done, especially in the volatile region called the Eastern Mediterranean. But I'll do my best to provide you with some insights about, first of all, like highlighting that the Eastern Mediterranean, I would like to focus on this part of the world, is in need of multilateral schemes, is in need of multilateralism. One should, first of all, highlight the fact that there are many good reasons, at least two that comes up to my mind, for multilateralist schemes to be promoted in the area. First of all, to make the natural gas monetization projects in the region and the EU independence from Russia feasible. That's a very good reason. Number two, to not allow the transformation of the Eastern Mediterranean to yet another conflict zone. I would dare to come up with a proposal by, first of all, describing the rationale behind that proposal of a multilateral scheme that could be promoted in the area. The rationale for multilateralism in general and for that multilateral scheme I'm about to talk in a minute is, first of all, to make the states, I would say, in the region realize that the costs involved in following unilateralists' policies due to the dominance of balance of power considerations, exceed the benefits or the possible payoffs they could collectively achieve if more cooperative relationships were chosen. Especially in regard to the Eastern Mediterranean, I think by including all littoral states to a mutually beneficial partnership, it will also engage Turkey and give it incentives to collaborate with neighboring EU member states and the European Union itself, based on what has already been heard, the creation, the establishment of a rules-based regime in the Eastern Mediterranean, based, of course, on the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. What is the key issue for dealing with current instability in the Eastern Mediterranean? Obviously, the delimitation of the maritime boundaries of the Eastern Mediterranean states. So my proposal is to invest on what has already been proposed by the European Union for a multilateral conference in the Eastern Mediterranean, an idea, a proposal made by the EU Council, the President of the EU Council in September 2020, that was his words, for building a rules-based multilateral context in the Eastern Mediterranean, based, as I have already mentioned, on the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. What does that proposal concern? Is about the organization of an international conference that would involve the key parties in the Eastern Mediterranean and NATO, and in order for the thorny issue of the maritime boundaries in the region, but also some other issues, such as energy, security in general, or migration, to be also discussed. Of course, there are a number of difficult issues to be addressed. I won't touch upon those issues, but I would prefer to highlight the EU's role, the upgrading of the EU's role through that initiative. It seems that it is worth noting that the EU has lost some of its regional influence and appears to lack a coherent and comprehensive policy or vision towards the southern neighborhood. So based on particular strategic documents produced by the European Union, Global Security Strategy 2016, the Strategic Compass in 2022, it seems that the EU is now very much interested in investing in the advancement of its European neighborhood policy and in supporting cooperative regional orders worldwide, especially in the Mediterranean. So it seems that the moment is indeed now for the domains of foreign policy and defense for the EU and the member states to tackle head-on the very real challenges of the Eastern Mediterranean. It would also be in Greece's interest for the bilateral maritime delimitation agreements already signed to date with Italy, with Albania, with Egypt, as well as the effort currently underway to jointly delimit the exclusive economic zone with Libya, to be incorporated into that broader EU-proposed multilateral conference in the Eastern Mediterranean. And I'll conclude with Admiral Diakopoulos has referred to symmetries in threat perceptions. I would rather prefer to talk or to highlight analogies in multilateral initiatives aiming at building a rules-based environment or a rules-based architecture, which has already been taken by the former Prime Minister Abe in the past by highlighting the need for a free and open Indo-Pacific policy framework, which was announced back in 2016, with the aim to upholding international law and strengthen regional stability. So it seems that there are very good reasons for both countries not to touch upon threat perceptions or signatures of threat perceptions, but rather on analogies with regard to initiatives that may take in promoting stability, both in the Eastern Mediterranean as well as in the Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Professor Tsakonas, and now Professor Galani, along the same lines. I mean, in view of the many and rising challenges described also by the keynote speakers, is regional cooperation an adequate scheme of addressing the challenges, or should and how could efforts be intensified in the framework of international organizations, in particularly the United Nations? And how can small countries contribute to highlighting, to giving prominence to the importance of the issue and bringing it into the priorities of the international community in its vision for the future?
Thank you very much, Ambassador Boura. Before I start, I should thank the organizers of the event. So thank you very much to the Japanese Embassy and Your Excellency, Mr. Ambassador, as well as ELIAMEP, of course. Now, in response to your question, I think that if one was taking notes of the presentations that were given earlier, I'm not sure that they would be able to keep track of all the actors and the initiatives that were mentioned. So, for example, we mentioned NATO, the EU, regional initiatives such as the Combined Task Forces, the Djibouti Code of Conduct. So we see that there are a number of actors that try to enhance maritime security, and there are a number of initiatives, international and regional initiatives. Now, in my view, all of them have their strengths and their weaknesses. And why is that? For example, regional cooperation. The role of regional actors has been extremely important in terms of maritime security, for the reason that maritime security is something that is not universally defined, is something that is understood on the basis of the needs of each specific region. And this flexibility is exactly what has allowed regional actors to adopt tailored responses to the problems. So ASEAN, for example, would place more emphasis on piracy, for example, or illegal fishing or interstate disputes. The African Union might want to place more emphasis on transnational organized crime, or even the lack of safety aids that help safety of navigation. The EU, on the other hand, is very keen to deal with the challenge of the smuggling of migrants. While if we go even beyond, we will see that CARICOM, for example, CARICOM was the first actor that adopted a legally binding maritime security agreement, which hasn't come into force, but again, it shows the efforts of states in the different regions on the basis of their needs to come up with solutions. Now, the problem, of course, here is that this leads to very fragmented responses to the problem. And the very interesting thing about the oceans is that on the basis of the law of the sea, we always try to find a rules-based approach on the basis of maritime zones. But maritime borders only exist on nautical charts. They don't exist at sea. So criminals, for example, will not have to cross any borders. They just do business at sea. And for that reason, we need international responses. We need to be able to take a holistic approach to the problem. And this is where the importance of international organizations, and especially the UN comes in. So for example, the various agencies, we have the IMO, we have the UNODC and the Maritime Crime Program. that they tried to find solutions that would be applicable to all countries and would help countries find solutions to the problems and improve safety of navigation. We even have the United Nations Security Council with its resolutions and the discussions in the Council. Many times the Council has tried to come up with solutions to problems that have to do with safety of navigation, be it piracy or the embargo on the transfer of illegal weapons. And this, of course, gives me the opportunity to mention that, you know, with Greece's coming up candidacy, and if Greece is successful, it will have a seat at the United Nations Security Council. And there it could also promote an agenda on maritime security. We saw India a couple of years ago in 2021, 2022, how successful they were in trying to build a roadmap to improving maritime security. And I think that Greece could also contribute to that, taking over the initiative and contributing to the efforts to improve maritime security and safety of navigation. So I will just, I should also mention very briefly the role of states and the efforts of states to come together and collaborate. Very often states feel more comfortable to find solutions themselves than having to be bound by international agreements or other sort of legally binding instruments. And to some extent, this works very well for the reason that like-minded states can work together to build trust. And this allows them to share intelligence, to share data, which is extremely important for the improvement of safety of navigation. You know, dealing with threats at sea requires collaboration. And we know that states are not very willing to give the information that they have, especially if they feel that some of these threats affect their national security. Of course, again, this has its weaknesses, that we have states that have the capacity to do that. And this takes me to the last point about what smaller states can do. Smaller states should be able to participate in these initiatives, to be heard, but at the same time, they need support. And this is where maritime capacity building comes in. They need support to be able to tackle threats. And this will come from international organizations or states like the US or Japan or other states that have the capacity to enable smaller states to deal with problems, especially when it is around their own coasts. So overall, I think that we need all of these initiatives. We need to find a way for them to complement each other and plug each other's gaps, because I don't think that we can miss any of them, and I don't think that either of them is effective on its own. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Galani. And now, Mr. Trifilis, you represent the shipping community, and you are, if I may say, a user of this route. So we would appreciate your comments on the issue in question, in light also of the presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Boura, and thank you to the organizers and the gracious hosts at the Theocharakis Foundation. It's the first time you hear your voice coming from a tape recorder. It sounds a bit different to what you are used to, and in a way, attending a non-shipping focused shipping forum is a similar experience to me, because we're used to hearing a very shipboard perspective. And now we are looking at a very shore-based perspective, and we are looking at the individual parts and interests rather than the seamless route that we are used to. But that's just to give you an impression of how something familiar, looked at from a different perspective, can reveal different attributes. Now, first of all, for the sake of the audience, I should specify that shipping comes in peace to this conference. We are the end user, and we are the people that enjoy the security and the safety of the seas. But of course, this enjoyment is passed along to the global consumer in terms of a reliable service and fairly cheaply priced per ton mile, also with the lowest environmental impact. So we're making the most of this safe passage. This is a big development from imperial past, in which, for instance, the UK or Holland or other great powers would have navies that would support their own trade. The modern shipping model, especially the Greek shipping model, is to be a complete cross-trader, to be independent of the source or the destination of the cargo, and to offer that transport leg. Other nations have a slightly different model. Maybe Japan's is a bit more integrated into their economic system, and it might be a bit more linked with the specific energy needs and export-driven economy. But still, their vessels, along with ours, compete globally. Japan is the biggest member of the Panama flag, so it's a very international field, which brings me to some discussions about Greece and Japan. Probably many of the people are aware of them, but I feel an obligation to set them as a background. Greece is the world's largest ship-owning nation globally, and of course within the EU. Greek shipping represents, with a fleet of about 5,000 to 5,500 vessels, accounts for about 21% of global capacity in deadweight and 60% of the EU-controlled fleet, while the Greek flag is the 9th largest ship registry, with about 700 vessels flying the flag, and 1,800 vessels fly EU member flags. Japan is ranked 3rd in the world in terms of ship ownership, with 4,000 vessels, representing about 10% of the world tonnage. Although I should add, the Japanese tonnage is much more valuable per vessel and much more sophisticated, especially going into the LNG fleet and other specialized services. Japan and Greece have a common interest in shipbuilding. Ship owners have made massive investments in Japanese new building industry since the 1950s, contributing, we say, in an unprecedented way to the growth of this sector and the Japanese economy in general after the Second World War. I know an ambassador of yours in the past has said, "Thank you, island of Chios." And being 1/4 Chion, that was a big moment for me. Japan and Greece have, between 1952 and 2001, it's been estimated that on average, a ship built in Japan has been delivered to Greek interests every 2 weeks over a period of 70 years. So that does show a continued and strong relation on a very fundamental basis of technology, capital, and export, also for us a big foreign earning platform. Over the last 5 years, 140 new buildings of 12 million capacity have been constructed in Japan, mostly bulk carriers, crude and product carriers, and LPG tankers. Now, that's the commercial, let's say, side of things. We have a bilateral trade side as well. So there was a recent memorandum of cooperation in the field of maritime technology and industry signed in 2019, promoting closer cooperation and exchange of information for maritime technology. And of course, the recent MOU with our PM's visit this year, which brings the two countries even closer together. It's important for Greece and Japan to maintain their collaboration in the IMO, being two nations that have a clear perspective and understanding of what it means to plow your trade in a hostile environment as the sea, away from the head office, and being in charge with such sensitive cargoes, whether highly valued technology or just simply very important food stock for the rest of the world. In December 21, both Greece and Japan were elected to Category A of the IMO Council, in the group of states with the largest interest in providing international shipping services. It's nice to see the world appreciating this role. An important and tangible outcome of the good cooperation between Greece and Japan have been, inter alia, proposals submitted by Greece and Japan with various important shipping issues. And we're expecting, and we hope, that Japan will have a greater leadership of this global forum, because sometimes there is this perception that Greece is biased and is promoting its own agenda, where in essence, we would very much like Japan to step up, both in the IMO and Intercargo, and to give their view freely of what is feasible and what is not feasible. And here, of course, I'm thinking also a bit of the green agenda and certain expectations that might be beyond the capacity to be realized within the short timeframes envisioned. despite everybody's desire, of course, to do our best for our common world. Now, the indispensable role of international shipping for the global economy, I think it's been mentioned, about 80% of everything is carried by sea. And there is obviously, the more integrated the world is, you will have raw materials in different places from processing capacity, and you'll have consumers in different places. We are concerned increasingly by closet protectionism or crypto protectionism. Some of this is coming under the banner of the green agenda, and I'm thinking a bit of the US IRA bill, followed by equivalent steps by China, Japan, probably the EU, everyone supporting their own industry in the name of the environment. This is creating some obstacles to the status quo ante, which was a very free flow of goods, services, people, and capital. We're seeing this being limited. Then when it comes to UNCLOS and IMO, the importance of application of UNCLOS principles of the freedom of navigation, as well as the right of commercial ships to enjoy an unimpeded transit passage, is obviously the most critical thing for us. So the 50 destroyers mentioned by Japan and the various assets referred to, and multinational task force, we appreciate this because it does guarantee transit through difficult places. The recent UN High Seas Treaty, in which 30% of area not under anybody's, let's say, supervision, has been placed under protection for humanity, is a great step in the direction of creating a framework for places that were basically until now unaccounted for. And I think it does reflect a bit literally what went on with the hot air balloons that were moving in a part of the atmosphere that was neither high enough to be considered space, neither low enough to be considered, civil air, and therefore was anybody's territory. Nobody had thought of that middle Goldilocks area. And apparently this is what's happening a bit with the oceans. We should add that, of course, we are very concerned if there is too much exploitation of the ocean beds, that this could increase the speed with which the maritime environment collapses. It could have unintended circumstances, vibration, noise. We're already seeing some difficulty of certain species communicating across the oceans, especially whales, mothers and children. And we're trying to address this through propeller technology and other things. But if we're going to be mining in the ocean bed, it seems like an exercise in futility. Decarbonization of shipping is an imperative. It's underway. We'll probably start from the short sea, inland waterways, areas close to urban populations, and later to the high seas. The energy intensity needed to carry, hundreds of thousands of tons in something that's not exactly streamlined is immense. Looking at it now, it's likelier that there will be some variation of nuclear energy substations passing on energy to vessels in the decades to come, and until then some variation of fossil fuels or biofuels, but it will not be so easy to plug in your ship mid-ocean. If you wanted, you'd need more than all the grid of all the US just to send a few ships around the world, so that's kind of very difficult. Piracy and armed robbery were discussed. Just to give you an idea, some recent press release of a new daily record of passage through the Suez Canal, 107 vessels in one day, 25 container ships, 28 bulk carriers, 33 tankers. Annualized, that would be 35,000 vessels transiting that area. No need to add, we all remember what happened last time a big container ship got pushed by the wind in the wrong direction. So there are security issues, but there's also nature to contend with. I wouldn't like to take much more of your time, except to say that there is a success story of multilateral collaboration in the name of feeding the starving people of Africa, and that is the grain corridor out of the Ukraine and the Black Sea, even in the midst of increasingly hostile posturing around the world. The only thing the world can agree on is to extend it by another 120 days. And the net result has been that since the beginning of this initiative, 814 vessels have already exported 24 million tons of grain to Asia, Europe, and Africa. So that shows that even when the world is, at each other's throat, feeding, even in order to sustain fighting, is part of human nature. So thank you very much. Hope that was useful.
Thank you very much, Professor Trifilis, Mr. Trifilis.
I get confused around
yes,
here too.
Yes, our professor. So, ladies and gentlemen, finally we have reached the end part of this panel. Would you like to say? Oh, sorry, yes. So, finally we have reached the end part of this panel before coffee break. And I would like to thank the keynote speakers and the panelists for their very informative and interesting contributions. It brought attention to a number of pertinent issues and raised a number of questions as to the importance and the challenges facing safety of navigation, and I'm sure that they will raise a lot of questions at the next panel. So the region from the East Mediterranean to the Indo-Pacific Ocean was identified as one of paramount importance for peace and stability in a changing and volatile environment. Cooperation and coordination at bilateral, regional, but also international level will contribute to efficiently addressing the emerging challenges, and that will be to the benefit not only of the region, but of the international community as well. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Chairman, Dr. Boura, and all the keynote speakers and the panelists. So now we'd like to take a 10-minute break until the second session starts. So just for a household picture, coffee and snacks will be available yes, in the cafeteria on the first floor. And please just note that the coffee and the teas are not allowed in this place. So we are trying to keep this place clean and we understand it. So I will see you in 10 minutes, which is 9 minutes. Professor Tsakonas will be the chair. So please.
Thank you very much. We may now proceed to our second panel, which looks much more interesting. It's about Greece-Japan cooperation for the safety of navigation from the Eastern Mediterranean Sea to the Indo-Pacific. There is a change in the time devoted to the keynote speakers. So I would like to ask each keynote speaker to keep the time limit. I was also told to be strict with the time limits. I'm usually strict. I'll do my best. So without any further ado, let me ask Professor Ken Jimbo, who is our first keynote speaker in this second panel from Keio University, to take the floor online. Professor Jimbo.
Well, thank you very much. And as this is my double duty, second role in this symposium, I'll try my best to be as brief as possible. And thank you again for inviting me to this second session as a keynote speaker once again, to explore the potential for Japan-Greece cooperation in enhancing safety of navigation. And also, I think we really need to develop the gateway strategy for us to access more robustly to the East Mediterranean Sea, and for Greece to engage in the Indo-Pacific region. So I will like to specifically try to raise some of the specific and detailed policy recommendation for further discussion. So let me once again share the slides. As I already mentioned in the previous session, that the two nations has a significant maritime interest, and Japan and Greece have much to gain by working together to address the challenges of today's complex maritime security environment. So I will try to propose a couple of policy recommendations. Where is the specific policy to strengthen Japan-Greece cooperation to explore the importance of bilateral mutual strategy? So first of all, I think there could be the opportunities for Japan and Greece for safety of navigation from Mediterranean Sea to the Indian Pacific. First of all, from the beginning from the low-hanging fruits, I think we need to explore establishing the regular dialogue processes, especially among navies and also between the coast guards. And I think those will facilitate the greater understanding and cooperation between the two nations in addressing maritime security challenges that face with each other. Secondly, sharing the best practices are, I think, a very important outcome of those dialogue. And Japan and Greece can share best practices, lessons learned, and insight into the maritime security, safety of navigation, and the protection of the maritime environment. Third, I think through those practices, which I'm going to, offer some example in the later, but through those, enhancing interoperability is one of the, I think, most important outcomes of such a processes. That will contribute to, enhance the interoperability among Japan and Greece naval and coast guards, leading to more effective cooperation in the face of regional and global maritime challenges. And in doing so, I think in the previous session, I think there were very good comments made by Professor Sofia Galani over the conceptualization of the maritime security is not universally defined, and each region or the nation needs to tailor its own response, which means that I don't think the one-fits-all approach to the maritime cooperation would work fine in every cases. But in order to how the distant nation can collaborate on the specific scale can be categorized into, I think, several parts. First of all, for example, when we organize the Quad by engaging India into our trilateral cooperation of Japan, Australia, and the United States. And that was very important to have the kind of common definition over what are the safety measures and what are the, I think, concept of the risks and danger among four nations. So by practicing its own maritime security measures, once that the standard has been shared among each other, that could be connected in the wider scale. So you don't really have the Quad cooperation can be done in every spectrum of the cooperation in the region, but among those Quad members, for example, it's each bilateral relationship are organized among Quad cooperation through having a common, I think, sets of standards and exercises. And that is something very important way to connect the distance nation all together to have those collaboration on the ground. And secondly, for example, we do have the RECAP cooperation, that is the region-wide cooperation on the counter-piracy operations. So by specific issues, not the kind of whole dimension of the maritime cooperation, but having a kind of a common agenda and common benefits are included, that is something you can really have the potential of exploring cooperation. And the third part is the regionalization. And I think at the last session, the moderator very skillfully tried to frame the issue, why that, multilateral corporations are in retreat, but still think for the optimization of reformulating the regional agenda moving forward. In that part, I think that Asia's experience can be part of some example in the Mediterranean region as well. One of the example what we have is the North Asia cooperation among the Coast Guard grouping, and that involves the Canada, China, Korea, and Japan all together. And that is, I think, a way that the regional cooperation were playing in order to share the practices of the safety measures among Northeast Asian Coast Guard's counterpart. And we also are now emerging to have developments of the another 21 country cooperation among the Coast Guards. It's called the HACGAM, and that is also a very important platform for the Indo-Pacific states to share those experiences. So I think that those kind of so-called cross-referencing cooperation can be very important to, I think, for Japan and Greece to refer what has been happening and in Asia can also be referred as the practices in Europe and also at the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. And that might involve our practices of developing the maritime domain awareness measures and coastal patrol, HNDR, and also, as I mentioned, best practices at the sea. And finally, I think that that will also involve the joint participation in the wider regional framing. So Japan and Greece do not always have to pursue the joint agenda by ourselves, but also jointly participating in the wider framework. And I think that is also the way how the bilateral cooperation can move forward. And one of the potential is the NATO Operation Sea Guardian, and which can strengthen the Japan-Greece cooperation together with NATO member states, which aim to maintain the maritime security and deter terrorism in the Mediterranean Sea. And also joining the NIRIS maritime exercise in the Mediterranean Sea will also enable Japan and Greece to enhance the naval interoperability and build strong relationship with other participating states. So I hope that this could also energize the SDF as a regular kind of presence in the Mediterranean Sea as well. Also, as a reciprocally, I wish that the Greek naval forces and coast guards also have opportunity to sail into the East Pacific and also more, potentially to the Western Pacific as well. And one of the potential to develop is to, I think, encourage, Greek Navy to participate in the I think multilateral cooperation like a Pacific Crown, and that is the naval cooperation among Japan, US, UK, and Dutch, 4 countries get together. And this is the, I think, genuinely Indo-Pacific basis that involves the European states to get involved in this region. And the wider, I think, participation processes, including Greece, will be, I think, a very encouraging sign that European, states have a mutual stake in Indo-Pacific and vice versa by Japan and Australia, India, to be involving more to Europe. And eventually, for free and open Indo-Pacific, which Admiral Ambassador Umio Otsuka have alluded to in his presentation, and those are something beyond, I think, Navy to Navy, Coast Guards to Coast Guard cooperation, but has a lot of stake in promoting the safety of navigation in the Indo-Pacific. And I think that all deal with the, I think, emerging robust economic engagement among like-minded states, which creates the awareness how important the infrastructures of the connectivities and the sea lanes of communication that might be vital for both countries' engagement in the emerging markets, wider space in Indo-Pacific. And probably that might also be our platform to engage so-called the global South countries, which may have a Goldilocks consensus among them, but with a robust engagement through those like-minded states, we do share lots of notion and the modality in the in the way of a policy coordination, not to be divided by the G7 plus country and the global South, but through those kind of economic connectivity. And that might be a great, I think, way that the Japan and Greece can have a mutual, I think, promotion and the platform to make things clear, make things work. So maritime security and economic security could be some kind of, I think, conceptual platform that both countries can also move things forward. And as I mentioned, that, I think gray zone challenges, MDA, maritime law enforcements are something that the 2 countries needs to, exchange our notes and then to seek for deeper collaboration and the emerging kind of awareness over the economic security. And the previous speaker has also mentioned about we are now redefining our market economy into a more strategized manner through the supply chain resiliencies, export control, import restrictions, subsidies, and those are the measures that now the major countries are now taking place. And how can Japan and Greece will promote such kind of economic security measures through those kind of economic transaction is something that we can also deepen our collaboration. Eventually, that will have a deep implication over how important to navigate ourselves to secure the safety of navigation in the wider region. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Jimbo. I was struck for being holistic and specific at the same time by providing certain all-encompassing, actually,
recommendations as to how cooperation between Japan and Greece, between Greece and Japan, can be promoted and enhanced both within a bilateral as well as
within a multilateral context. So let me now invite the floor
Professor Maria Gabrielli, well-known international law scholar, a colleague at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, for her thoughts or comments on that interesting topic on how exactly cooperation between Japan and Greece for the safety of navigation can be achieved.
Thank you so very much, and thank you for the invitation. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here among you and share some thoughts and ideas. I do have a very brief PowerPoint, which I expect would be on the screen very, very quickly indeed. And that would allow me to just visualize my thoughts, if you like. Now, the topic today is actually has to do with cooperation for the safety of navigation. And one would actually think that perhaps you can take over and move to the next slide, please. Thank you. One would think that this idea of cooperation for safety of navigation is really a straightforward kind of situation. I mean, we're talking about safety of navigation. How complicated could it be? Cooperation, again, is something that appears fairly easily done, considering geographical constraints. You could envisage perhaps a corridor that would start from Greece and the Mediterranean on the one end and would go all the way through the Indian Ocean to the Pacific, with Japan on the other. And one could see how you can put little bricks together and create this kind of chain of cooperation. However, if we would like to be slightly more going through the details of that, then we would easily realize that there are several layers. One of those layers is, of course, the fact that we don't need to be necessarily bilateral. This state-to-state cooperation is obviously the foundation of all cooperation. But as Professor Jimbo has just indicated, we also have a regional-to-regional kind of situation. We can have a multilateral aspect that is still alive, not necessarily kicking, but still alive. And we can take advantage in other ways. In other words, of established procedures. What I would like to concentrate on, however, is really the depth of the notion of safety of navigation. And as you can see on the screen, I can actually identify 4 different layers, at least 4 different layers. There may be others, but these are the 4 that I would like to highlight. The first one is freedom of navigation, which is the obvious one. The second are security matters, which also have a wide range of concerns. There are a number of issues that have questions of criminality on the one hand, questions that pertain to human mobility, migration, issues that have to do with pollution and whatnot. There's a third element, which is sustainability. It's impossible to talk about cooperation or anything these days without actually looking at what happens tomorrow, literally tomorrow. Sustainability lies at the heart of all our concerns. And of course, the wider range is respect for international law through a rules-based legal environment. This is the environment that we have constructed after the Second World War. It has served us well for a very long period of peace and prosperity, and I, for one, would be unwilling, if not extremely reluctant, to let it go without any further indication. Let's go to each one of those things at a time and see whether we have tools available that might actually help us in creating our construction, our cooperation within certain parameters. So freedom of navigation is certainly the core obligation. And here we're talking mostly about safe maritime infrastructure. In other words, here we're talking about sailing, obviously, the ocean blue. But in order to sail the ocean blue, you still need a port to go to. You need to have storage facilities to put your merchandise. You need to have fueling and cleaning services. Cleaning is important for pollution as well. So you do have all kinds of things like that. And we do have a brand new tool within the European environment. And that brand new tool is the new Critical Infrastructure Directive, 14th of December 2022. It cannot get more bright new than this, in force since 16th of January this year. And you can easily see that here we do have a number of issues that could be very useful to us. 3 priority areas: preparedness, response, and international cooperation. 11 sectors: energy, transport, blah, blah, blah. Believe me, is there any one of those sectors that would not be useful for maritime cooperation? And I would only highlight digital infrastructure. The world today is moving into unmanned ships, and the way that freedom of navigation is actually supervised and controlled from the shore at all times. So if I were to choose one of those things, I wouldn't go for transport. I would go for digital infrastructure. Mind you, the Critical Infrastructure Directive leaves aside questions of defense. And of course, there is, of course, an interface with defense, but still it is extremely important to concentrate on these things. The directive speaks of the need for each member state to come up with revised risk assessments and stress tests by October next year, and a national strategy to be adopted by 2026. You would consider why the national strategy would come at the end. Clearly, because we need to build on what we have. And I think that is a very well thought of approach. We usually come up with a strategy in advance and then we don't know how to go about it. The proper way is actually to create it bit by bit. If you really want to see what that would look like, this is one of the projects that are actually being run as we speak, the Critical Maritime Routes Program, the CMR. And already Admiral Diakopoulos has mentioned CRIMARIO, which is the Indo-Pacific aspect of the Criminal Routes Maritime Routes Program, 2015 to 2024. And you can see in blue the area that is actually the area of operations, and Japan obviously is in there. The next element is energy. And energy has a number of issues that would actually provide layers of concern for the safety of navigation. I'm not here talking about energy as a fuel. I'm talking as energy as another use of the oceans that could actually interfere with safety of navigation. And here we do have, first and foremost, a wide variety of energy installations, fixed and floating, all kinds of different things all over the place. I have just put them here for you to see. However, what is of interest is actually that we are having a number of issues that need to be done in terms of jurisdiction. That gets us back to issues of delimitation, and that brings us back to what we have been talking earlier. Professor Tsakonas was talking about delimitation and all the operational issues. These are real-time examples of how the pursuit of energy objectives may end up with trouble. This is a real photo from the Mediterranean, and this is a real NAFTEX from the troubles that we had recently in this country. Let's move on to security very, very quickly. And you would see here again a number of examples of what this would look like. This is a map of all the European Union instigated projects running in terms of safety of navigation, but also what is there and we have to take care of is actually migration. I'm not putting that to criminality, I'm putting that separately, simply because, as I said, I consider that an element of the human condition and we need to address that in those parameters as well. What is a common denominator quite around there is actually the need for cooperation. Let's move on to sustainability very, very quickly. Sustainability, climate change preparedness, and that would actually blow into a different kind of things. One very important element is sea level rise, which has an impact on baselines and therefore sea zones. That would have an impact on borders, established or not, and jurisdictional zones. You can immediately see the repercussions of this discussion. However, there is another reason that I have chosen to highlight here. When we're talking about the Indo-Pacific strategy, and Professor Jimbo was talking about that earlier, there is a certain reluctance by EU member states to move far away from what they consider familiar. If they were told to just go out there in the wide blue sea, far away from home, If they were told, however, that they need to go there and cooperate in order to address climate change concerns, depletion of fish stocks, loss of biodiversity, believe me, their voters would be all too happy to do that. So is that a ruse de guerre? I don't care. If it works, it's fine by me. So I think that is the kind of thing that we need to see more and more of. The confrontation of China before and after Ukraine and the different ways in which we perceive ourselves these days after the aggression, the Russian aggression in Ukraine would actually help us in that respect. And what would also help us in that respect is actually my final point, which is respect for international law and a rules-based environment, the law of the sea. There's no question about that. But also we do have a new high seas treaty, that incorporates concerns about biodiversity and climate change and environment, but also security issues, also navigational issues, also the kind of medium within which we're talking when we're talking about cooperation and safety of navigation. All these are actually present in the way we move ahead in the future. We need certainty and security of law, and that also means peaceful settlement of disputes. These peaceful settlement of disputes could encompass courts and tribunals, but it would also encompass a conciliation effort. I've been public about this kind of thing, and again, Professor Tsakonas was talking about a conference in the area. All these concerns are actually presently reflected within the new update of the EU Maritime Security Strategy, 10th of March 2023. Again, a very brand new document with all the proper words and notions in place. And I would be very happy to discuss that further with you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. I saved my comments regarding some of your thoughts for the Q&A session, but I'm very much tempted to highlight the fact of digital infrastructure, the importance of digital infrastructure, which has indeed been highlighted in Japan's national security strategy document. There is a serious commitment with regard to this particular issue. So, without any further ado, let me ask Professor Sofia Galani for her 10 minutes intervention.
Thank you. Two very quick observations before I start. I should say that I'm very glad that I see many of my students here today. So we can relax. If we cannot find all the solutions ourselves, a new generation is coming up and they're very hands-on, which is good. The other observation I would like to make is that Professor Jimbo has made my life very easy today because he has covered a few things that I wanted to mention. And this shows that we don't only have like-minded states, we have like-minded scholars, and this means that we can very easily pave the way for more collaboration between the two countries. So the issue that I chose to discuss in some more detail today had to do with something that Professor Jimbo mentioned earlier about gray zones and low-intensity attacks. And I thought that the problem of increasing hybrid threats at sea is something that is not already covered in detail in the maritime security strategies that we have already. I mean, NATO is picking up on this issue, but in other regional strategies is not mentioned. And to be honest, I haven't had a chance to read the new strategy of the EU to see whether they actually mention that or not. So what I would like to do in the next few minutes is to highlight that, hybrid attacks, which falls within the general debate about hybrid warfare and hybrid aggression, is not only Russia's monopoly, and is not only something that happens on land. We now have hybrid threats and hybrid attacks at sea. And what we mean by that, we mean attacks against vessels, we mean attacks against their cybersecurity systems, against shipping facilities, energy installations, or we might not even talk about attacks. We might talk about some sort of harassment against vessels, interferences with the freedom of navigation. And all of this, of course, have a chilling effect on the safety of navigation, on maritime trade, and of course on investments, especially investments that have to do with energy, installations, pipelines, cables, and so on and so forth. Now, these attacks, these threats have certain characteristics, which Professor Jimbo mentioned already. I will repeat them very briefly. We talk about states committing these attacks, but in practice, it's actually private vessels that are being used for that. So we will not see warships. We're not going to see vessels being on government service. We see private vessels, such as fishing boats, for example. And these boats never have uniformed personnel on board. They have non-state actors, they have proxies, or as the literature calls them, they have little blue men. And these little blue men are armed, sometimes they're heavily armed. What they do is they commit what we call low-level, low-intensity attacks. And the problem is what Professor Jimbo said, we have a gray zone, and this really blurs the boundaries when it comes to the application of international law. These attacks do not reach the threshold of war, so states need to respond to these attacks by peacetime measures and operations, such as maritime law enforcement. And it's very, very difficult to attribute responsibility to a state. In all of these cases, states say we have nothing to do with them, it's just criminals. So it really blurs the boundaries of international law and how we use the different legal regimes. Do we talk about armed conflict? Do we talk about, law enforcement operations within the law of the sea regime? What happens there? Now, to give you a couple of examples that are of interest to our discussion here today, China, for example. In the South China Sea, we had a few incidents with fishing boats attacking other fishing boats of other nationalities, or even vessels of coast guards. And there has been exchange of fire, and the reaction of China is always the same. We have nothing to do with it, they're just criminals. But actually, this is intentional. China uses these boats in order to assert sovereignty over the region. And of course, when the problem arises, they say, you see, this place is full of criminals. I'm going to send more Chinese warships to deal with the problem. And in this way, they assert even more sovereignty in the region. Iran has tried to do the same. I mean, they very often rely on revolutionary guards or Houthis or false flag groups in order to harass vessels, to attack vessels. which again causes significant problems in terms of safety of navigation. In the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, I don't think that we have experienced similar attacks, but for example, upon the request of Spain, NATO has recently included the smuggling of migrants as a hybrid threat in its strategic concept. And the EU has already started treating this issue, the issue of irregular migration, or as a hybrid threat. Of course, this goes back to something that Professor Gavunelli has already said. I mean, it's a big debate of whether irregular migration is a security issue. I would not like to go there, but in practice, what we see is that large flows of migrants inevitably interrupt maritime trade, because there will be occasions that the commercial vessels will have to stop and rescue people. And of course, the question is, what do we do with them, since states don't allow disembarkation in many occasions? And again, this raises questions about safety of navigation and of course, shipping interests. Now, what are the solutions to these problems? What could states do, and what could Greece and Japan do, and how could cooperation move forward? I think it's very important for both states, first of all, to study the problem more. I think it needs to be clear for both states what they mean by hybrid threats, which are these threats that they might perceive as hybrid threats. They need to have a sort of plan. They need to have a sort of strategy. And of course, here again, we have multilateral cooperation. For example, Greece, as a member state of the EU, has been discussing this issue within the EU organs and discussions, but of course, Japan and Greece can cooperate on that matter themselves as well, and improve bilateral cooperation on the matter. The other thing that needs to be done, and again, here I might be repeating things that have been already said, but of course, I mean, there is no magic recipe for success. Since 9/11, when the discussion on maritime security intensified, states have realized that there are certain things that need to do in order to improve maritime security. And here, for example, tactical understanding of the problem is very important. We need to understand how these little blue men operate, how they're being directed by states, what kind of threats they pose, how they do it, what kind of weapons they use. We need to have to gain a tactical understanding of the problem. And this goes back to something that I mentioned earlier. Exchange of information is extremely important. Exchange of intelligence is extremely important. I mean, each state cannot operate on its own. They need to cooperate. And we need to build this collaboration between like-minded states. We need to trust each other. And this goes back to some of the issues that were mentioned about the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. I mean, the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, it's very difficult to build this sort of collaborations. Ideally, we should, but it's not easy. Japan and Greece, I believe that they can cooperate better on that matter. Creating, for example, a hybrid threat center could be a forum where Greeks and Japanese could come together, you know, scholars, people for the naval forces, to discuss this matter more. I mean, the EU and NATO operate their own center in Finland. They have a hybrid center of excellence already on the matter of hybrid threats and hybrid war. But shouldn't we have a similar center in the Indo-Pacific or the Horn of Africa, where again, data will be collected on the matter and will be used accordingly to develop appropriate strategies? And finally, again, it's an issue that has been mentioned by Professor Jimbo, but I agree. I mean, training and cooperation between the naval forces is essential. And again, this doesn't always have to be under the umbrella of international organizations. States can do that on their own. And as I said, if they trust each other and they feel that they can do it and they can come together and work on the matter, they should do it regardless of whether this comes under the mandate of the international organization or not. We have the experience, because of piracy, we have the experience of building centers, information centers. We have the experience of naval training and cooperation. So we do know what we need to do. The thing is that we need the political commitment to doing that in practice. And I think, examples such as this event where experts come together and discuss the matters, I think that they're very important and we should facilitate them as much as possible. So we'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Alani, for highlighting how to identify gray zones and low intensity attacks and provide us with the context about what Japan and Greece can or cannot do for tackling those issues laying in those gray areas. I'll now give the floor to Ambassador Umio Otsuka.
Is Ambassador of Japan to the Republic of Djibouti for this 10 minutes intervention.
Yes, thank you very much. For those who live at sea, whether in the military or merchant marine or the fisherman, there is a commonality because we have to, first and foremost, in order to make our business, we have to be accustomed, or sometimes we have to conquer the sea, because living on the sea itself is not a very simple, easy one. And but with my background of being in the military, or being as a naval officer, for me or for us, the freedom at sea is the ultimate goal to maintain for the peacetime and even for the wartime purposes. And interestingly, when it comes to the commonality of the seafaring people, the Navy, very different from the Army, has what we call the nature, international nature, because we always exchange, even during the peacetime, we exchange, and that is called the naval diplomacy, in order to prevent the war. And if, unfortunately, the diplomacy fails, we have to fight against each other. But the major, the most significant characteristic is that we have historically engaged during the peacetime. And so that created nature of international engagement. That means what people discussed in the previous session as well. The sense of universality has been brought up amongst the Navy. But on the other hand, as was discussed in this session, that each region has a specificity. And if my understanding is correct, even within the NATO, the northern flank and the southern flank, the target or the threat or the purpose of activities are very different, or east and west also different. And so this is the major paradox, universality versus the specificity based on the region. And I think in this forum, that point was very well taken and discussed. But what I would like to suggest more concretely as an ex-naval officer who is now stationed in Djibouti, the center of all the problems of this universal problem of piracy and illegal activities. I understand that for Hellenic navies, it's not very easy to come out to the Indian Ocean through the Suez Canal and Bab el-Mandeb because of the distance and the requirement of their vicinities in the region. But I can assume now, especially after the breakout of the war in Ukraine, the Hellenic Navy must have more things to do in the Eastern Mediterranean seas. And I recently went and stayed overnight on a French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle when she passed nearby. And I was briefed that they did some activity in Eastern Mediterranean area together with allied navies to maximize their presence for the sake of the deterrence in terms of the war in Ukraine. So that is a versatility of the Navy, and for us, the Japanese Navy, the Self-Defense Force, also we are very busy, as I told you, in our vicinity vis-a-vis a gigantic troublemaker. But having said that, Japan has our own framework working for counter-piracy in the region of the Gulf of Aden and the Horn of Africa area. And or the Hellenic Navy has already given a framework as Admiral Diakopoulos mentioned within Operation Atlanta. So why don't you come out to the Red Sea and to the area of Djibouti to getting together for any exercise or even for some staff talks, because as my slide shows, this is what I see every day from my office. Day by day, the different navies come and go. So it is a very easy place to get engaged on a day-to-day basis. So this is my comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Otsuka, for keeping the time limit, first of all, and for very, very comprehensive and concrete intervention. I give the floor to now to Mr. Alexandros Diakopoulos, former National Security Advisor to Greece's Prime Minister.
And Director General of International Cooperation of the Hellenic Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Admiral Diakopoulos. Although part of his, that's my feeling, of course, part of his remarks have already been said somehow, but we're looking forward to your comments.
Coming up with new ideas on the spot.
Inevitably, since I am the last one to talk, bear with me, there will be some repetition, okay? And I want to second what I'm not going to send Ambassador Otsuka. Admiral Otsuka has said about the international character of the Navy. I mean, I fully agree with every remark of his. Now, at the first session of today's meeting, we had the opportunity to share and exchange views around the safety of navigation, freedom of navigation. And we identified the factors that put in danger the freedom of navigation or that influence negatively the maritime security. And I believe we all agree that we need to advance and enhance our cooperation bilaterally as well as multilaterally in order to address the challenges and eliminate the risks. And if I may say off script that it's a pity that we don't have some active duty Navy guy in the audience. I mean, that would be very, very interesting to him as well. Greece believes that the EU's engagement in this vital region should be principled and long-term on the basis of international law and shared vision for regional security, stability, and development. Moreover, Greece has recently acceded to the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, TAC, of the ASEAN, formalizing thus its willingness to cooperate with the regional actors and the countries of Eastern and Southeastern Asia. Globalization and technological advances have reduced the distances, so we're not that far anymore. And what happens in one part of the world affects every other in a globalized world. As I said before, Eastern Mediterranean is linked with the Indo-Pacific through the Suez Canal and provides the shortest maritime route between Asian and European markets. Hence, the goal is common. From this perspective, I think that there is room for possible cooperation and improvement in several domains. Next year, Greece and Japan will celebrate 120 years of Japanese diplomatic representation in our country. I hope that you will be here to celebrate together. This landmark of our relations, together with their upgrade to strategic level cooperation, as resulted from the recent official visit of the Greek Prime Minister in Tokyo, attest to our willingness to develop strong ties between the two nations. Therefore, I believe that our countries should initiate strategic dialogue and common training that could foster and examine the respective subject by bringing together respective subject matter experts in the field of maritime security and the law of the sea. In this regard, we could set up workshops to exchange views and explore opportunities for further cooperation in the domains of the application of UNCLOS, the freedom of navigation, and marine environment protection. Another area of cooperation, it has been mentioned before, but by Professor Jimbo, another area of cooperation could be the periodic conduct of Navy-to-Navy staff talks and tabletop exercises dedicated to maritime security issues. Subject matter experts, again, can develop a variety of scenarios, including cybersecurity, which would definitely increase our capabilities against cyber attacks on maritime environment, hybrid attacks, and including the use of drones by non-state actors, or crisis events, or even incidents of natural disasters that affect the safety of navigation. Possible outcomes could be the exchange of lessons identified, of best practices, as well as boosting the interoperability between our respective naval forces. We should also develop mechanisms of information exchange. Data collection and information sharing will increase maritime domain awareness, which is a vital component to ensuring that competent authorities can detect evolving threats and respond to them rapidly and effectively. The reciprocal appointment of defense attachés would greatly facilitate the process. Moreover, Greece, as a member of both the Virtual Regional Maritime Traffic Center and the Transregional Maritime Network, and these efforts have attracted the interest of 35 seafaring nations, and now currently are operating under the auspices of the Italian Navy. The overall vision is to maintain a virtual network which connects maritime operation centers of the members in order to share information related to merchant shipping. I believe that taking advantage of these initiatives could be another step forward, and I'm referring to the Japanese Navy, so as to enhance our cooperation and show our concerns for the global maritime security. We can also work together to design capacity building programs for third nations dedicated to safety of navigation. All the above could be facilitated by the exploitation of the training facilities and experience and expertise of the NATO Maritime Interdiction Operational Training Center, the NMIOTC in Souda Bay, Crete, which provides tailored to the needs trainings for maritime security issues to NATO allies, but also to other partners and like-minded friendly nations. And the nations from the Djibouti Code of Conduct are participating in the training of NMIOTC, so I strongly recommend that you look at the matrix. Greece and Japan are both maritime nations that are strongly committed to international law and share fundamental values. It is in the common interest of both countries to maintain and strengthen a free and open international maritime order based on the rule of international law, particularly as reflected in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Admiral Diakopoulos. No worries for being the last speaker. You see that there's always room for knowledgeable speakers to complement what has already been said. And thank you very much for your very clear-cut and concrete policy recommendations as to what is ahead of Japan and Greece in terms of collaborating on promoting the idea of and collaboration on safety of navigation. We have about 7 minutes or so. So I should probably open the floor to questions. But before that, and having the pleasure of having with us the current National Security Advisor of the Greek government, I would like to ask him to intervene for 2 or 3 minutes on probably what has already been said, in case there are issues that have somehow provoked his interest in coming up with some ideas. Probably you are all aware of the fact that there has been a national security strategy being released on the part of Japan in December 2022. So personally, I would very much interested in having the current National Security Advisor ideas, views, to the extent he would like to share about Greece's national security strategy and what is ahead for Greece on this new, this volatile environment we have to deal with, especially in this Mediterranean.
Thank you, Tsakonas. As you know, we have a national security strategy, but not in a public forum yet. That should happen in the next few weeks or months. So I would like to share a couple of telegraphic remarks. First of all, I think it's very useful that we are having today a discussion which starts upon a concept which is not broadly known, that of global commons, high seas, the atmosphere, cyberspace, and outer space. And I think we need to have more discussions on this. Then, just to highlight some of the things that have been said about common interests. First of all, we need to protect sea lines of communications and choke points. That's very important for 2 maritime nations like Greece and Japan. Also, protect maritime infrastructure. NATO and the EU are devoting considerable resources to develop a strategy on those issues. And I think both Greece and Japan would be very interested in exchanging views and sharing expertise on this. Then countries cannot choose their neighbors. We both have difficult neighbors, and we both have past efforts for a code of conduct with our neighbors to avoid accidents and miscalculations. So I think confidence building measures in the maritime domain might be an area where Greece and Japan could exchange experience and best practices. Also, a number of threats have been mentioned. I would like to add one more, maritime terrorism. Now, it is true that prophecies and scenarios have not been proven right so far, thank God, and terrorists don't seem to feel very comfortable in the maritime domain. But one can think of a few scenarios, kinetic ones, to sink, to blow up a ship, to cause casualties, or to sink a ship to block a canal or a choke point. The scenario that Yanis Trifilis mentioned about the Suez Canal
that was an accident. It might not be an accident next time, or as digitalization of ships increases, and some of you may have watched the movie Speed 2, where someone takes control of the ship. It could happen with all those, and the little blue men that have been mentioned. These are things we need to think about. And of course, really problematic in bad scenarios, it's difficult to control what container ships are carrying. There are lots of scenarios about nuclear terrorism. So an area where countries could work on. My last point, I like very much what Professor Gabinelli mentioned about linking the dots or bringing the bricks together. It's one of my pet projects, watching the EU and NATO becoming a bit more outward looking in the maritime domain, and having all those schemes of cooperation, trilaterals, 3+1, going potentially all the way to the Indian Ocean, and perhaps linking with the Quad. I think there is a vacuum there, lots of malign influences and other problems and threats. This is something Greece and Japan could discuss in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have enough time for 2 questions, brief questions, and I will ask for brief answers. So, your name and your affiliation.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Marinos Vivadas. I am a merchant marine officer. My primary question is, Professor Jimbo, with his opening remarks, stated that the Japanese nation in the near future would increase its military expenditure in order to better defend its sovereignty in the area. My primary question is, do you believe that this could lead in an escalation in the Pacific area with the neighbors of the Japanese nation? We've seen throughout history and in our own country that militarization of border areas leads to diplomatic standoffs, and with neighbors that may not be as democratically inclined as is South Korea or Japan. Do you believe that there could be some form of state-sponsored terrorism or piracy or illegal activities, to say the least?
Thank you. The gentleman. The gentleman there.
Okay, first and foremost, I'd like to thank you all for your insightful inputs in this discussion. I'm Dimitris Vassiliou from International European Studies, University of Piraeus. Here I represent the ELIAMEP and the Young European Federalists, Greece. So my question would be, actually I had more questions, but due to time constraints I had to shut them down. So it's free for all the panelists to ask, but most of the time the legal experts on this. We've discussed about the Greek and Japan relations and how in a strategic context this can prove to be beneficial for us both. What I would like to ask is that what lies in between, and that's the elephant in the room, in my opinion, and that's basically China and the top points that de facto controls, mainly the Spratly Islands that due to the geoengineering process that started in 2014 and the island building efforts that China made had saved drastically the general geopolitical value of the area. In that context, firstly, I would like to highlight the sustainability and the environmental value that this whole process created. In environmental economics, we have a cake sharing problem that, in other words, we have finite resources and infinite generations of those resources to be directed to.
Can you
China
please
here,
try to keep it brief?
China here actually, we can see that has manipulated or has actually destroyed the environmental aspect of this very, very important area for all our planet. What can we do to make this more sustainable? And B, how does the One Belt, One Road initiative that China has elapsed, how can this influence the bilateral relations with Japan and Greece? Thank you.
Okay. Before concluding, okay. Okay. Get one more question. Keep it brief, please. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm from Greek Turkish Embassy. I'm Counselor Deniz Ançar. Thank you very much for organizing this conference, and thank you for all these thought-provoking, insightful presentations. And special thanks to Ambassador Otsuka, because he mentioned Turkey's role in the fight against terrorism in Djibouti and Somalia. And he also mentions very, very nice things about the historical background of Turkish-Japanese relations. We are grateful for that. We are grateful for also the help of Japan and also the government of Greek and the Greek people after the earthquake in Turkey. Thank you very much for all of this.
Well, is there a question?
Yeah. Just this, please. We share much in common in terms of the freedom of navigation. We also support freedom of navigation. We also support Turkey multilateralism. That's why we proposed in 2020 a conference, a Mediterranean conference, including all the actors in the region. We are also against the maximalist claims. And I just want to point out that we share very much in common with the And my question goes to Professor Boura. She mentioned the importance of digital infrastructure. What are the latest things in this domain, in the international organizations that you mentioned? Thank you.
Okay, great. So I would propose Professor Jimbo to react on what has been asked by our first, I think, speaker.
Unless you would like to respond to any of the questions that followed, but I would like to ask you to focus on this, the very first one, and then any of you who might feel happy to respond.
Well, thank you very much for the question. As you mentioned, that Japan has decided to fundamentally reinforce the capability of the self-defense force through our new national defense strategy adopted last December, and also to increase the defense budget almost to the double the size of what we have in 2022. And with that, escalate the tensions in this region is also kind of the debate that we can explore further. But what we are seeing today, as I showed in my slide, is the dynamic distribution of power has been triggered mainly by China, and the region needs to somewhat catch up with how to maintain the favorable balance of power in this dynamics. And what Japan has adopted is not to catch up material size of China by purchasing more weapons, but to provide, equipped with our capability, enable ourselves to asymmetrically try to deny the Chinese ambitions and their prospect of the success in their military operations. So let me give you an example. If you go to Yokosuka, that is the base of the headquarters of the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, and look at the Pacific Ocean that is wide open. Okay, so you feel how important the safety of navigation from the Yokosuka point of view. But there's a China. I mean, you go to Shandong province, there's a Qingdao, there's a base of Chinese flotilla on the eastern military district. If you go to Hainan Island, there's another, southern fleets are located. From that perspective, to look at the Pacific, it's very narrow. Why? Because there's so many choke points that the Chinese Navy have to go through in order to access to the Pacific Ocean, which means that although we do have a difference of the power capability, if we are able to navigate, to concentrate the power on the China's choke point, it is still able to, I think, confine their operation within so-called the first island chain. So this is the kind of asymmetrical way how we can keep the balance among those, unstably distributed power balance in this region. And China tried to deny the US access to the region. Japan tried to counterbalance by having asymmetrical capability vis-a-vis China. And then probably all the ASEAN nations tried to make themselves more resilient to the coercive measures that the China potentially might take. So this is the kind of, I think, one by one structural relationship, how they can asymmetrically deny with each other. And this is some kind of unorthodox, I think, the power structure that the Asia is now generating. So you can call it this is the arms race, but I think it's the arms race in order to make ourselves, I think, in a hierarchical manner to create, I think, a relative stability in this region. And I think this is what's happening in East Asia.
Thank you very much. To the extent that Admiral Otsuka is still with us and would like to respond, please feel free to do so now.
Well, thank you very much. Our Navy, which is called Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force, started its origin, of course, after the Imperial Navy was gone with the failure of the war against the United States back in the 1945. Started from kind of a constabulary force, but stepped up in order to counter the Cold War. And so I think we won the Cold War in a statistic fashion. But after that, the Navy, whole Navy in the world, seems to lose its raison d'etre, because the enemy demised. But suddenly, because a cork of the bottle is gone, which was oppressed by the two superpowers, the dividend of Cold War didn't emerge. Instead, the transnational threat came up. So transnational threat must be taken care by not only one country, but by a group of the like-minded countries. That is why now our Navy, as I told you, has been working very hard, 10,000 kilometers away from home in order to fight against the global threat. So therefore, this is a kind of the nature that doesn't have any frontier, that doesn't have any border. And so this strategy has come after actually the real job to expand its horizon in a peaceful manner to project a peace from the viewpoint of the Navy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professors Labrunelli and Galani. Sort of brief.
Well, brief comments for a number of issues. I take the question of, apologies. I take the question about the islands, be it the Spratley or anything else. It's a pity I don't have with me a photo of the Spratley, so that you can actually see with your own eyes how big the island is and how the big island, the Abu, whatever I don't remember the name anymore. It is, however, very, very clear that what Professor Jimbo has indicated is that here you have a collection of islands. Here you have a collection of islands that has been enriched and enhanced, if you like, but still a collection of islands. The difference with the other collection of islands we have in the Aegean and in the Eastern Mediterranean as a whole is actually the size, the distance between the islands. In the Spratlys, I recall vividly a guard who was actually pointing his gun towards the next island, which was 8 nautical miles away and belonged to Vietnam, or was claimed by Vietnam. And 8 miles with a shotgun, I mean, I'm not a military expert, but I mean, it doesn't take too much, isn't it? On the other hand, to reach the Abu by air, I remember that it was 3.5 hours flight from the southern point of Taiwan. So the distances are significant. And therefore, we need to start talking about the impact of islands, but our islands are close by, so their impact is much less than we would like to see in terms of wider space. Their impact is very, very significant in terms of neighborhood. Because accidents of history bring us very close together, we need to work around that thing. Now, I said earlier, and Professor Tsakonas has indicated, has highlighted that, and you have also asked me, Ma'am, about digital infrastructure. I think for me, that is the one thing around which we're moving. And that has several repercussions. Let's start from the easier to the most complicated. How do you control navigation in the old days? Lighthouses. Consider digital lighthouses. These are the choke points that we're talking about today. Can you possibly navigate through choke points without digital infrastructure in place? You simply cannot. And that would help you also in terms encountering terrorism, encountering piracy, all kinds of other threats that would come along the way. Are we talking about the possibility of actually putting a boat through its spaces, if you like, by putting merchandise in without use of digital technology? These days, people, you can have containers put on a boat on a 24/7 kind of basis. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. We should be talking about energy. Energy in terms requires cables and pipelines. If you have a windmill somewhere in the middle of the sea, far off in the Aegean, you would still need cables to bring everything ashore. And the cables would actually be a lot of them on the floor. So you would interfere inevitably with fishing, with navigation, with just about everything under the sun. And that's the reason why, and it has been indicated by both Admiral Diakopoulos and Mr. Dokos, this is the reason why all our effort these days is put in creating, in countering digital attacks, and therefore reinforcing the resilience of our digital structure. And this is actually the reason why at the end of the day, we are talking about the overall supply chain resilience. It's not just the questions of breaking our lines so that we may not be held hostage again after Ukraine and Russia, but also make the whole process sustainable in the long term. I will stop here. Thank you.
Respond? Be really brief.
Very, very briefly, I would just like to pick up on the point that was mentioned about the One Belt, One Road initiative. This initiative, in terms of safety of navigation, in terms of Japan-Greece cooperation, I think it entails, it raises 3 issues. The first one is that, when the number of vessels increases, then it always this causes the risk of having more attacks to vessels. Okay, so inevitably, especially when you have choke points, this will give rise to more threats. The other issue that we have with this initiative is that China very smartly invests in low-income countries in the Indian Ocean, in Africa, something that other countries do not do. And finally, the other risk has to do with the fact that we've seen that before and we know that China, if it feels that there are threats and if it says that I need to protect my shipping engines, my boats, what it's going to do is that it's going to use more warships, and it will also use private vessels to protect commercial vessels in shipping industries. One example is that, for example, we've seen China already that presents itself as a near-Arctic state. It wants to tap into the Arctic Ocean in the sense that it really wants this transarctic route as part of its One Belt, One Road initiative. And it has already started building warships that are able to navigate through Arctic waters. So China is promoting its own agenda, which is fine, there's nothing we can do about it. The thing is that we should not be left behind. And as Professor Jimbo said, we need to work to catch up with what they do. And this is why cooperation, again, between the countries are important. I mean, we need to make sure that we're not left behind. We need to make sure that we do have naval presence as well. And we all know that this is very expensive. Sometimes it may be cheaper just to invest in a maritime capacity building where you train guards of other states, of low-income states. So in this way, you increase your influence, you improve cooperation, and in a way, without having to spend too much money to have your warships traveling around all the time, you do have a significant presence and you're able to work much more effectively towards promoting safe navigation. Thank you.
Yes, I know we're out of time, so I will be really brief, but it was mentioned a little bit. I got this thought, and Mr. Doko said about connecting the regional schemes. We have 3+1, and then we have I2U2, and then we have Quad, and we have some countries, United States, not all of them, and then we have some countries, I mean, India is in Quad and I2U2, Israel is I2U2 and the 3+1, and the Emirates. So maybe, and considering the EU's global gateway and what was said about the BRI, maybe we should see how we will create this alternative infrastructure that will connect Greece to Japan via all those regional schemes. And this is my closing remark. Thank you very much.
Well, we may conclude at this point the panel. I would like to thank you all for your participation. Mr. Ambassador, has always been a pleasure and an honor to work with you, for ELIAMEP, to work with the Embassy of Japan. And I assume I can declare the whole workshop as a success. Thank you.
Yeah.